Hi, my name is Dr. Steve Inequality and I'm Senior Lecturer in Social Policy at the University of Wolverhampton, and this is a short video about inequality and how we teach inequality on the Social Policy course at the University of Wolverhampton. Inequality has been an absolute, has played a central role in the development of social policy, and if we go back to when the academic study of social policy begins in the early 20th century, one of the first areas that it starts to look at is inequality, and not just inequality but also how inequality can be addressed, how policies can be developed, and the ways in which government and voluntary sector organisations and society can address many of the issues and the problems that arise from inequality. And we're talking about, on a very fundamental level, we're talking about problems of people not having enough food, not having enough clothes, not having enough shelter, but also people not feeling part of society, people being malnourished, and the education and health inequalities that go with poverty and inequality as well. And significantly, those inequalities, they have a personal cost in as much as they are not good for the person and they limit the person's life and social and personal development. But they also have a public cost as well. The government ultimately has to pick up the pieces. So it's not really an ideal position to be in, to have a society that has high levels of inequality. So actually the study of poverty and inequality begins though in the latter part of the 19th century with Rowntree in York looking at what he describes or what he defines as being absolute poverty. Absolute poverty being when you have not got enough money and food and clothing and shelter to survive. The government gradually starts through liberal reforms in the early part of the 20th century and post 1945 and development of the welfare state begins to address some of the issues of poverty, and it's done so in a more generous and more all-encompassing way as well. However, by the late 1960s, Abel, Smith and Townsend look at poverty and they say actually what's significant is that the welfare state has not eradicated poverty. And they look at a very financial measure of poverty and they say you're in poverty if your income is below 60% of median income in the country. And that's really interesting because what we're saying is we are moving beyond a definition of poverty that says you should have the bare minimum that you need to survive. We are moving towards a definition of poverty that says actually you should have your fair share of the wealth of that nation that you have contributed to. And if you do not have your fair share, 60% of the average, then you are in fact in poverty. And that's a significant shift. That's about distribution rather than just physical human resources. Scooting forward to contemporary society, what's really interesting at the moment, certainly post 2010, is that we see ourselves having increasing levels of inequality. So for Labour, that had been post 1997, that had been an area they'd focused on, not just looking at financial poverty, although they had made changes to benefits, but also looking at social inequality. They raised the issue of social exclusion, for instance, and how people can be included in society. They feel they can have a stake in society. And so Labour identify this vision of social inclusion and financial inclusion. Post 2010, the concept of social exclusion has largely, in fact, completely disappeared from policy. But what we are seeing though is an increase in financial inequality. So in other words, people experiencing poverty. So this is unusual in a way because although we have increasing levels of poverty and increasing levels of child poverty, we also have decreasing levels of unemployment. Prior to the COVID pandemic, we had some of the lowest levels of unemployment that we've had since the mid-70s. So for over 40 years. We have low levels of unemployment, yet increasing levels of inequality and increasing levels of poverty. And the reason for this is that fundamentally there are two ways in which you are going to avoid being poor. One way is through social security. That could be child benefit, it could be local housing allowance to help with your rent, it could be a range of other benefits including unemployment benefit or universal credit if you are out of work. And the other way that you will avoid being in poverty is through employment, through wages, through income from working. But what we're starting to see is post 2010 we've had a series of welfare reforms that have what we call residualised welfare. That means they've made welfare as low as possible, and so people have increasing levels of conditionality to claim benefits, and the benefits they claim are low and not increasing in line with inflation, so in real terms people are getting poorer. What we also see is the rewards of work are getting lower as well. We have more what's termed precarious employment. So precarious employment is 0-hour contracts where you are not guaranteed a set number of hours per week. We also see gig economy work, which is people such as Deliveroo and Uber drivers who technically are self-employed. And all of this means that many people are actually getting paid below what will be the minimum wage in real terms once they've actually had their money for the week. They are working more hours and getting paid less. So this is deeply problematic in many ways because people tend to spend pretty much all of their money. So the less money you give to people, the less money they have to spend in local shops, spend on holidays, spend on new washing machines and carpets and cars and going out to restaurants and cinemas and everything else like that. And our economy is reliant on demand, economic demand within the economy. So poverty has an economic cost of low demand. People do not spend, and that prevents economic growth, which will allow higher wages. There is also a personal cost to poverty, but in the long term there is also a social cost. It will affect all of us. People growing up in poverty, so child poverty is particularly bad, people growing up in poverty will have worse health outcomes, worse education outcomes, they will contribute less to the economy, they will have a higher demand for welfare and a higher need for welfare. So actually poverty affects all of us and is something that really needs to be addressed within society. And the only way that's going to happen is through government intervention. At the moment we are going through a significant recession post-COVID, which is likely to be deep and which is likely to be with us for a long time. Those who have been in poverty will have the fewest resources, they will have the least resilience, they will have the lowest levels of savings, and they are the ones who are most likely to face job losses and be made redundant. This will carry on and perpetuate levels of poverty. So poverty at the moment is getting worse, and this post-COVID recession is likely to make it even worse. And we are in a strange situation where even work and welfare will not get you out of poverty in the long term. We need to have a significant policy rethink and a policy change. Thank you.